In order to understand what this podcast is all about, you need to do something first. You need to believe that all things are possible. My name is Henry St. Just. My story is pretty simple. I am an immigrant. I am an Afro-American. I went from college dropout to software architect. And you can too. Welcome to Degree Optional. Today we have Ian McKain. Ian, first and foremost, I'd like to thank you for accepting the invitation to be on Degree Optional and sharing your background and how you got into tech and delivering enterprise-grade application at scale. So before we get started, can you tell our listeners more about yourself?
Yeah, then thanks for having me. Been really looking forward to doing this. Really love the idea too. Super cool idea for a podcast and platform. I'm Ian McKain, senior software engineer for a little company called NetJets. And a little bit about myself. I have a very non-traditional background in terms of my career. And when I say non-traditional, I mean even well beyond just the tech space and the non-traditional format of how people get into tech. I have a pretty non-traditional career path for any career for that matter. The journey for me, transitioning into tech was a long winding road. So just a little bit about, where I came from. So from a career perspective, I had my first official job when I was 14 years old. I was actually a telemarketer when I was 14.
Okay.
I've always worked, I've always tried to do something with my time that I felt was going to be worthwhile. And that one, I wanted to actually get a paycheck and not just do the mowing lawns or, random little jobs and stuff that I would find, people from church or whatever, whenever you're a kid, you get what you can find. Right. So, I actually had to get a work permit for that job. I convinced my parents to go down to the courthouse or whatever and file for a work permit. But that was actually really good. I made $16 an hour at 14, doing telemarketing. It was soulless, but it was good.
Okay, nice. So it was hourly. It wasn't what's that Vector, like the knives company where they got all of us when we were younger.
I had so many friends that worked for them, man. Yeah. No, it was hourly. You got commissions if you get bonuses more than anything. I called for Fraternal Order of Police and Special Olympics of Pennsylvania. So it was more donations and nonprofit kind of stuff, which made it a lot better. At least I could feel somewhat okay about doing that. But yeah, it was a very interesting first job. That's for sure. And while I had that job too, I worked construction as well. So from the time I was 13, 14 years old, I was on job sites as a gopher, just give me this, give me that, picking up nails, that kind of thing. And so I had worked construction for quite a long time, all the way through high school. And when I was 18, so my birthday's in October, so it's towards the end of the year. So 2008, turned 18, got my contractor's license somewhere around November, I believe, and started a construction company, mainly building log homes. 2009 to 2012 is around, early 2012, we started to shut down. And that was For me, it was one of those things. I always kind of saw like career path in school as separate kind of things. I was someone who self-learned quite a lot. I read all the time from the time I was a kid. I started I've always read books. I started reading chapter books when I was 7, 8 years old. And I used to read a lot. I read my first Nietzsche book when I was 15. And, I got really into philosophy and a lot of other things around political science, and that's what I ended up studying in college. But
Nice.
I've always been a big proponent of self-learning, and so my career, my schooling and learning were very separated for me. They weren't entangled. I feel like it's a big difference from most people, including all of my friends. Most people kind of put those two things very hand in hand. You have school, then you have career. And to me, it was career and school are separate paths. And, to that end as well, school wasn't a huge priority for me. I had my construction company when I was 18. I had jobs. I had money coming in. I felt like my career, I could kind of do whatever I wanted to really do. And school was never a huge priority. And that comes from other things, just kind of where I grew up. And, as a kid, you have a lot of external influences from various things, other friends, parents, people around you, the school system itself. Right. So, those waters can be really tough to navigate as a kid because you don't really know what you're doing. And honestly, anyone under the age of 23 is a kid to me.
Yeah. Because I think scientifically it says your brain is not fully developed until you're 25.
And I'm fully there. I fully believe that. I remember back when I was 25. Absolutely. And so, it took me a while to really find what I wanted to do, but since school wasn't a huge priority, I was honestly pretty bad at it. And mainly because of homework. There's a big systematic approach to how school works. You do you follow in step and you do the work and you do what has to be done in order to get the grade. I have never really been that kind of person. I kind of, make my own path in a lot of ways. And so school was not really something that I saw a lot of value in. And it's unfortunate too, because I wish I had. I'm not saying either that that's like a good approach. I don't think it is. Embrace school. I wish I had, looking back, because I could have learned more, right? I could be better even, than I am now. And that's really important to know. So,
just to dig into that a little bit.
Sure.
I also feel like the school system, the way they teach is broken, right? And it hasn't been thought on to improve upon that system since the beginning. And if you go back to, you said you're into like philosophy, right? So if you go back to the days of Socrates and Plato, the way they learned and they taught was to apprenticeship, right? You have a master and you have an apprentice. And then even looking back at Alexander the Great, his mentor and his teacher, when he was, I think, around 12 years old, was Socrates. So these things, they're related. That's why like the system that they had worked, and it built great empires and great people, men of valor. So if you look at the school system, if they were to incorporate apprenticeship, like going into an industry and following somebody, shadowing somebody, that would be beneficial for us.
Oh, totally agree. And I think there are some education options that do offer that kind of thing. And, I think everyone learns differently. I'm fully a proponent of different types of intelligences, right? And tailoring your studies and your learning towards those. but yeah, I 100% agree. I think it can be really tough with our current system, especially in America, because it's become so processed to death more than anything. They basically had to create this extremely bureaucratic system in order to achieve consistency or fairness or whatever you might say. And I think that kind of it bogs down the entire process. And I think you have people, teachers have a very, very, very hard job. I've had teachers in my personal life that I've known pretty well, and it really opened up a lot of perspective to me later on whenever I got to kind of hear about their daily lives and the things that they deal with, and just how inspiring it can be and how sad it can also be. I had a good friend who worked in a very poor school district, and they had a career day, and the kids, there were multiple children that were like, why would I need a career? I'll just get my check in the mail like my parents. And it's really hard to judge that, because it's like, well, these kids just, they follow what they know, right? Their world is, and everyone's world is so singular to themselves, right? So everyone's perspective is so influenced by these very important people in your life, like your parents and your teachers. And I think it can be really tough to gain some of that outside perspective for a lot of kids, right? And so the learning system is very tough, because you get a lot of teachers that I think become disenfranchised and then just kind of do okay, here's a worksheet, fill it out, you get your 10 points, move on. That's the part of school that I always found pointless. And this kind of good segue into this, right? Because I went into my senior year with a 1.8 GPA, and the fact that I'm saying that on a podcast too, please don't judge me, anyone that listens to this. I do have some brain in here. But I didn't fall in line. I wasn't goose stepping in the parade, so to speak. Right. So, I had a teacher in high school, and it's the only teacher I've had that was honest about the world. He was a history teacher. He was actually one of the first Green Berets ever. He fought in Vietnam and was a part of the Green Beret unit whenever they first created the Green Berets during Vietnam. And just a really interesting, super intelligent guy, a huge history nerd, which I am a massive history nerd. I love history. And so I really loved him. He was my favorite teacher. And so this was my junior year that I had him, my junior year of high school. And it was probably the only class that I did anything in. Everything else, I just didn't care. But I'll never forget it. The first day of school, we go into his class, and he's got a stack of papers in his hands, and he goes, everything you've ever learned and will continue to learn after this class will never help you in the real world. Everything you've done has not prepared you for what the real world or what college is going to give you. This class will. And he said, what I have here is a syllabus. And in this syllabus is everything you have to do for the year. So just like college, right? He ran it just like a college class. We had lecture days on Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, where he would get up and he would talk. And then the last 15 minutes of class, we had time to work on whatever we wanted, his work or not, and be able to talk to him and ask him questions. Tuesdays and Thursdays were open days. We could work on anything we wanted. We could sleep. We could work on other homework. We could work on stuff for his class, or we could ask him questions. It was kind of his office hours, right? So, and he even said, everything's laid out right here in the syllabus. If you want to get all your work done now, great, do it. If you don't do anything, that's fine. I don't care. And that was the only class that really prepared me for any kind of college structure or anything with life. And I really respected him for that. And I really liked him. And I'll never forget this because I owe a lot to that man too, because he kind of changed around a lot of my view, so the high school I went to, actually, I had 600 kids in my graduating class. Only 500 of them actually graduated. So we had 100 dropouts.
Wow.
I was prepared to drop out even because I had, I had money. I was working construction. I had other jobs as well and other income. I was very self-reliant. I didn't feel like I really needed school. And that's just part of where you grow up, right? Sometimes and who you're around. So, I remember my family was going on a vacation and they give you those pink slips, right? That you got to go have them sign. And I had all my teachers sign it and get around to Mr. Wilson here. And I was like, hey, I'm going on vacation. It was after class. I was like, hey, I'm going on vacation. Would you care to sign this? And he goes, no, I won't sign that. And just walked away from me. I was like, I thought he was joking, right?
Yeah.
I was like, wait, what do you mean? Like, this is just you sign it. And he was like, no, I refuse to. You don't deserve a vacation. And I was like,
oh, wow.
I was like, wait, what do you mean? He was like, I don't like you. He goes, you are lazy. You don't apply yourself. You don't use your ability to do anything worthwhile. And so I don't think you deserve to have any kind of vacation, and I will not sign that. And I was crushed because I loved this guy. That was the first time he had ever said anything like that to me. And I was so just inspired by him, and I related to him, and it really bothered me. So, I reflected on that a lot. I did a lot of self-reflection and self-actualization around that comment. And I really tried. So I started trying more and really putting effort into it, writing better papers for his class and really putting some time. And we had a total 180. We became, pretty close. He was a strong mentor to me for sure. And
that's awesome. Just to jump into that, right? You from the story, from what your background and your journey, it feels like, environment played a big role in how you thought about school, and then your interaction with Mr. Wilson. That interaction played a pivotal role, and that 180 that you guys did, or that you did, started focusing and doing your homework and your the papers, right? Like putting effort into it. Would you say that was a pivotal role in your journey to, I don't know, where you are now?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I think without that, I don't know where I would have been, to be perfectly honest. Like I said, I was fully prepared to just not be in school. I mean, like I said, I finished out my junior year with a 1.8, and the only reason I got that was because I tried in his class. And I remember it towards the end of my junior year too, Mr. Wilson was like, you got to do something. You have way too much weight. And this is going to sound pretentious, and I don't mean for it to sound pretentious, but he goes, you have way too much of a brain to waste it doing nothing and just working in construction and just, wasting your life. Like, don't do it. Go to college, do something, learn something, be better. And that was hugely important. That was an extremely pivotal moment for me in my life. And I owe him a lot. And I stayed in touch with him for, several years after that. And that was what motivated me, because, at that point it was like, okay, well, I'll go to college. I need to listen to this guy. I trust this guy. He's the only person that's ever been honest with me. He was the only adult that I felt was really honest with me about like what life is, and was honest with me about like, he even said like, I don't like you, like just straight up, like, and he didn't like me because he felt like I was just wasting my life. And he was right. Yeah, I was. So I wanted to fix that. I wanted to improve that. And I buckled down. Senior year comes around. I made sure to actually do my work. I wanted to get into college. So I got a 4.0 my senior year, which was the first time I'd ever done that in the history of school for me, just so I could get into college. And I fought tooth and nail to be able to get into college. I had to go and talk to the admissions director. Like it was a whole thing. And quite honestly, the only reason that I really got in, that they really took a chance on me and let me into the school, was because of the recommendation letter from Mr. Wilson, which, if I do recall, clocked in at around like 5 pages. Like he really stood up for me and went to bat for me in a lot of ways. And, I owe him a lot. And a lot of people don't get that either. That's the thing, is like, I had a very, I was very lucky, in some ways. I think some of this stuff comes down to luck, because when you're a kid, you just don't know what you're doing, right? You think you're invincible. You think you know everything. And of course you do, right? You have a very small window of perspective. And it was definitely the one thing that really opened my eyes. So I finally, was able to get into college. Attended Marietta College in Marietta, Ohio, which is across the river from where I'm from, Parkersburg, West Virginia, where I majored in political science with a minor in philosophy. So those are useless, right? And but I loved it, right? I loved domestic politics. I huge history nerd, especially in the political climate. It was something that I was extremely interested in. International politics, mainly a focus on Middle Eastern studies.
Okay.
Was my focus in college. And, even in college, I did I tried to fit into the box of what college provides, right? But going to a liberal arts college, you end up having to do a lot of courses that have nothing to do with your career path or what you want to do. So by the time I was a junior, I had actually finished out my capstone and all my 400s for political science and for philosophy.
Okay.
And that was, part of kind of my motivation when I did leave school. But, just kind of before getting into that, I, attended college 2009. And at this point, I had the construction company started that pretty early in the year. It was like March when we started in 2009. So that was when we started the construction company, that is. So yeah, it was, probably 6 months. I had that, but we were doing great. We were building log homes. Things were going very well. I had contacts in that space. So it was fairly easy to get things moving. And then, I actually had a couple other jobs too. I was a merchandiser for Scott's Miracle-Gro as well when I was in college, because they paid ridiculous. It was insane. I hardly had to do anything. I made like $25 an hour or something like that. It's like, yeah, whatever, I'll do it.
Nice.
Yeah, my schedule. I also worked at a fine dining restaurant on weekends, which I was the worst server you can ever imagine. I was terrible at it, but people liked me. So the owner kept me around. But, my schedule in college was crazy. So I had those 3 jobs. So I'd wake up every morning at like 5 a.m. I'd run cause this is back when I was fit, not so much anymore. I'd run 5 miles, first thing in the morning. And then I would head to our office around 6 o'clock. I'd get the guys ready, get the crew ready to go out to the job site, wherever that was. we built a lot of things locally, and then we had a lot of subcontracted jobs in Georgia, Virginia, North Carolina, Colorado as well. I think the furthest we went out was Colorado, but and so I'd go to the office, get them prepared, and then I would always have my first class around like 9 a.m., something like that. And I tried to schedule all my classes real early so I could get them done first thing in the day. And then after that, I would go and do my I would usually go and hit up my merchandising job because I could do that. And, it took me like 45 minutes per day kind of deal. And then I would go out to any local job sites we had, check up, make sure things were fine, be there if I needed to be there. And then, depending on the day, I would then go to my fine dining job, and I would be a server and do that. And then somehow I would go and hang out with friends too. I don't know how I had a social life. I have zero battery anymore. And I think it's because I earned it all out really early. Yeah. But I still don't know how I did it. But during that time, while I was in school, having the construction company, it was a pretty bad time to start a construction company. That was when the housing bubble happened. In case there's some young folks listening to this, the housing crash in 08 and 09 really hurt contractors and people that were building. So around 2011, banks stopped lending money completely, and it just wasn't available. So the work was starting to really dwindle down. Saw the writing on the wall. And started to look for an exit plan. So I started a hookah lounge, which was funny. So being in political science, I went to a lot of political conventions. I was in DC quite often. And I would go to hookah lounges when I was in DC, go out with people and you go to hookah lounges. It was fun. And so I was used to the concept, and I was in a college town, small college town, but college town nonetheless. And I was trying to think about what other, career options, what other business options are there that are pretty good money. So, that was one of the ones I thought of. I started doing some math, wrote up a business plan. Profit margins were insane. We had 44 cents per hookah and average 15 out the door. So, wow. Markup of 3,333%, I think is what it ended up being, which is insane markup. Very low overhead. And, I could still be in school and be around the hookah lounge because it was right down the road from the college. And so, I started that and started work on that in 2011, opened in 2012. And then that's when we also shut down the construction company.
Okay.
And after that, the hookah lounge was going well. We were making money. I had everything I needed from a career perspective. And I'd gotten to the point after my junior year, I'd finished all my capstones, my 400s. All I had left was just gen eds. And I didn't, and I somewhat regret this today still. But I was like, you know what? I'm not ever going to do anything with this degree. I'm just going to leave. What's the point of continuing to pay for this? And, I'm glad I even had that option, right? The fact that I had options available is not something that a lot of people get. So I keep that in perspective too, whenever I think, because it's not so easy to just say, "I'll just go do your own thing," whatever. that's not everyone has that option to them, right? So, and it took years. I mean, by the time I was able to do this, I'd been working, saving up, doing things with my own companies now for years by this point, right? So it was something that I got into very early on. And so I went ahead and I left school and focused on that full time. And then it kind of just, snowballed from there. So had the hookah lounge for 4.5 years, sold it in 2016. Before I sold it, though, I had bought a coffee shop with a partner. Bought that in 2015. We expanded that one to 4 different locations. Had net increase. We expand like it was like 320 something percent. I can't remember exactly what it was. Net revenue increase over the 3 years that I was involved, so to 2018. And it was good. I enjoyed it. I did a lot. Director of business development was my role in that company. So I was not a managing director or anything like that. Managing partner. I was more on the business side. So, but it was really enjoyable, and I enjoyed my time doing it. I got to learn a lot. And then, like I said, sold the hookah lounge. Shortly after that, the hookah just was kind of fell off. It wasn't really something that people were doing anymore. And especially when you're dealing with colleges, you have a constantly rotating customer base, right? So you have 4 years of classes, and if you have your juniors and your seniors love to go out and do that, well, as soon as they're rotated out, those underclassmen, those ones are now in that position, they don't do it at all, right? So you lose an entire customer base, and it was okay. I was ready to be kind of done with it. I staying up. I mean, there were times we weren't restricted by any kind of hours like other bars are. So I can remember times where we didn't close until like 6:30 in the morning. So that was a lot. You're there literally like 16, 18 hours a day. And it was good money, but I got sick of it. So, sold off on that, started investing in some real estate, which was just kind of a side thing. And then, I was like, I just really want, and I was doing the coffee shop stuff, and I was making money with the coffee shop, no complaints there, but I wanted normalcy. I wanted a 401k. I wanted healthcare. I wanted someone just to give me a paycheck.
Yeah.
And me just forget about things. Cause when you have your own business, and when you, even with a partner, right, everything falls on you. You are constantly on call. I always wanted to travel and go out of the country and do things. And I never got to do those things because I never felt like I could be away. Right. And that's really tough. So I just wanted normalcy, just like my friends, they had normalcy in their lives. And that's kind of what I get for, that's the price I pay for not having a non-traditional path. But, yeah, I wanted all that stuff. And so, that's when I sold my half of the coffee shop. I was focused on the real estate stuff and then just finding a job. I got in with a Fortune 200 doing business development, for them. And, I was just kind of bored with the work. Honestly, my job was insanely easy. I hardly worked, truthfully. And I had a lot of free time. Like I had a ton of free time. And in fact, it's funny because whenever I talk to people about this, they're like, man, why would you leave? That's great. You could sit around and do nothing. And oh my God, I hate that so much. Every time I talk to someone and they say that to me, it's like, I don't know how anyone could be comfortable doing that. Personally, that's me personally, right? Like I
feel the same way. Like, you sit down and you're not doing anything and you feel unfulfilled, even though you're getting paid, but you're unfulfilled. So it doesn't align with your passion, your purpose at all. So
yeah. And for some people, like if that works for you, that's fine. Right. But for me, I couldn't do it. So, I wanted to fill my time up with things that mattered because all I was doing was, talking to, dealing with business owners in the Columbus area and then playing a lot of golf. that was a lot of what I did. So, just wanted to actually do something. And that's when I started teaching myself how to code. And for me, it actually helped me within that role too, the business development role, because I was able to write, some Visual Basic scripts for my Excel sheets and automate a bunch of stuff for my job. Like I had tools that I had built that made my job super easy. Like I could get done like what took other people like a week and a half to do, I could have done in 15 minutes.
Wow.
And so that's why I had so much free time, right? Too. Like my free time became exponential. Like I was using my free time to learn and then using that learning to apply to my job, which gave me more free time. So it just, it just grew and grew and grew. And I had more time to be able to devote to this. And, I realized.
Did you ever externalize that, like the macros or the programs that you were writing? Did you give them to some of your colleagues as well, or you just kept them to yourself?
I did. I tried. I reached out to my boss, like, hey, I made this tool. Like, what, can we use this for the region? Whatever. And everything I made got shot down because there was some rules, and corporate is corporate, right? So there's rules in corporate industry where they didn't want cottage industry kind of tools popping up. They wanted, if you were going to use a tool at that company, it needed to come from the company. So they didn't. My boss had he was in love with it. He was like, "This is awesome," and approached it to the senior director and all the other things, and they were like, "Yeah, no, he shouldn't even be using this. So stop." And I was like, "Well, I'm not going to, but whatever." Yeah. It's not like you guys are going to know. But I did have coworkers that did use it. Yeah, the ones local to me that I trusted, and so I gave it to certain people, which made their jobs a lot easier. They would text me and be like, "Hey, I don't have to do anything. This is awesome. Thanks again for that." Yeah. And it's like, yeah, that's what, some people, they use their time for their family or use their time to sit around and do nothing. And that's fine, whatever. But
so was that your first language that you learned, Visual Basic?
So yeah, this is what's funny. And I know we were talking about this a little bit, but for me, I've always been very hands-on in different kinds of tech and very interested in technology and new upcoming things and just how computers worked in the first place. Even today with the code that I write now, it's so magic to me that it's amazing. It really is. It's like magic, and I love it. It's the most interesting thing. And I had started messing around with some command line stuff whenever I was younger as a kid. And I was doing coding stuff that I didn't even realize that I was doing things that could be used later, and so I won't go into a lot of that, but there was kind of my big one. I started building Hackintoshes, and if any Apple lawyers are listening, please don't come after me. I don't do it anymore. But I used to build Hackintoshes, and if you're unfamiliar with what a Hackintosh is, it's basically a custom-built PC using very powerful, good components, more powerful components than what Apple used to produce. I mean, this is back in 2009, the early or mid 2000s or mid 2010s. And so the Mac hardware that was coming out in those machines was pretty bad, honestly. It's not like it is today. The M chips are crazy powerful, but back then it wasn't. They were using Intel Pentiums and stuff. It was bad. So I was building these custom built PCs, and then basically split partitioning drives for Windows and then for Mac OS. And when you do that, you have to write some bootloaders and things. A lot of this stuff you can get from websites. So shout out to Tony Mac 86. I can't believe I still actually remember that. But there were some custom hardware components that I had got for a couple of the builds that I did for people, that I ended up having to write some custom bootloaders for. And that was my first kind of real foray into writing code. I had no clue what I was doing. Like before that, it was like HTML stuff, like web things, and then just the command line stuff that I was just kind of like a blind squirrel, just typing stuff into command line and seeing what would come out of it, right? And so I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was able to get stuff done, right, through perseverance and just continuing to try.
Yeah.
And it was fun. I really enjoyed doing it. That was the only reason I did it. I got paid anywhere from like $100 to $300 for like building these machines for people. And I didn't really care about making the money. It was people that were friends of mine, right? So it wasn't about the money. I just enjoyed building PCs and doing that stuff. So I don't know. I did probably like 20 of them.
Okay.
And it was fun. I loved it. And so that was like my first kind of entry into that. And, I had done other things with code. And like I said, I didn't really even realize that what I was working on were things that could actually like transition into a career path. I always saw myself as I've never been down on myself. I've always seen myself as intelligent in ways that I felt intelligent, which was, business, definitely self-motivated, self-learning, right? Like I had my own, kind of view around what my intelligence could offer, and what kind of intelligence I have, right? Like I said, I'm definitely a proponent of multiple different types of intelligence. And so anytime I thought about computers or people that write code, I always saw those people as just beyond intelligent. You think about someone that writes code, and I was amazed by those people. It was so interesting to me. And it's like, how can you be so smart? How can you figure that out? I always looked down on myself in that way. Like I was like, there's no, like, I can't do it. I can't be that, I'm not that smart. There's no way. And so I never really went at it like I should have.
Yeah. So when you thought about somebody who programs, a software engineer, who did you think about? Like the Elon Musk, the Steve Jobs, and Mark Zuckerberg?
Yeah, I mean, Steve Jobs for sure. And, here's what's funny about that too is, as someone who's a fledgling entrepreneur early on as a kid, you look up to some of those people that have started from nothing and grown into these just giants of industry, right? They can be hugely motivating, and their stories can shed a lot of light on kind of what a good path looks like, and shed a lot of light on, what is necessary to make that happen. And when you look at Steve Jobs, right? Like, yeah, he was a developer, he was a programmer, but he was a crap programmer. He wasn't even good at it. Steve Jobs was a businessman. Steve Jobs was an idea guy. And that's what's interesting to me, right? Because whenever I looked at Steve Jobs, I was very inspired by Steve Jobs as an early entrepreneur. He was very inspiring to me, and I took a lot of motivation from him. As a person, right? As an entity. But I also knew his story, and I knew that everything he did, Steve Wozniak is the one who built it, right? So you have this incredibly intelligent genius of a man who is one of the most humble people on the planet, to the point where he donated everything he had. I mean, the dude was I don't know if he is anymore, but I know he was a school teacher for a long time after he left Apple, back in his hometown. And you look at Steve Wozniak, and it's like, this is someone who is so far beyond intelligent, like that he just doesn't even care about money, career. Like it's just not even on his radar. And it's like that was hard for me to even understand, I think too, because it was like, I'll never be that smart that I can just like not care about what my income is. Like I'll never be that. Right. And so, you know, I looked at things like that and like, yeah, this isn't something I can do. You know, I went to high school with kids that went and got engineering degrees and they were in all the AP classes and just really intelligent. I kind of looked down upon myself in a lot of ways because, you know, I didn't focus in school and I always felt like I could have, you know, maybe I could have done it, but it was never something that I really tried. So I didn't think I had the intelligence. I didn't think I had the ability or the know-how to be able to do it. I just didn't think my mind worked that way. And that was really, I think that was really the only time that I actually ever, you know, really doubted myself, if I'm honest. I use that time as a motivational tool for myself nowadays. Like you can do anything if you just try, put your mind to it, try. You know, and even looking back, it is strange to think that I felt that way about that when I am so comfortable with failure. And if you're going to be a software engineer, especially self-taught, you have to be okay with failure. Like I am 100% a full proponent of mountain of failure, pit of success. And I think that applies so well to people that go to college and get into a career, whether that be in software development or not, right? People that go and get CS degrees because number one, they have, like, I know people who have CS degrees who do not do any coding in their free time. They do not care. They really don't even like it all that much, but they know how to do it and they're good at it, right? And they have the brain that works that way. And they put in their soft 36 and they go home, right? That's kind of their day.
Soft 36.
Yeah, man. And they're fine with that. And that's fine. You know, I'm not saying that everyone needs to like constantly be pushing and doing all this work for some like large enterprise, or even that you need to like necessarily be your own boss or any of that, right? Like, you know, do what's best for you. Do what makes you happy. And for a lot of people that enter into that career, they just have this adeptness from just years of conditioning, schooling, and that repetitive nature to be able to just enter in the workforce fairly easy and be able to thrive, or at the very minimum survive. Right. So,
sure.
Yeah, I think about, you know, people with CS degrees too, and just how easy it is to get a role, regardless of if you like it or not. Once you have that piece of paper like that
or if you're good at it or not as well. So, because they have the degree. So I want to ask you, like, when you thought about, you mentioned you're self-taught. How long did it take you to actually go from, I'm going to do this and I'm going to learn about this? Like, how many hours did you put in? Was it working on the weekends, putting the time in to learn how to code and build something? Was it project based? Was it just, you know, tinkering around?
Yeah. So great question. Yeah. So in 2018, after, you know, after I had sold the coffee shop, I was kind of looking around. Like I said, I was trying to find, sold the coffee shop, you know, middle of the year, and had my real estate and was looking around for a corporate role. And so I was, you know, I was playing around with some things. I was having fun. Nothing really too crazy, just like getting involved in some web dev stuff, and then just like some few little command line things. Yeah, I was getting into a little bit of Python as well, and it was just something that I like doing. And so I like I said, the Visual Basic stuff, writing macros for my Excel sheets and other things. That's where it really started to take off for me. And I was like, ooh, I think I can actually do this. And so I started, just kind of researching, right? It was like, okay, well, what can I do? Like, what do I want to do? And I had to actually think about it, because it's tough when you're researching it on your own, especially coming into this totally fresh. Like I had friends that were software engineers, and they went to it straight from college. And so, to be honest, they weren't very helpful, right? And I love my friends, but I would say this to their face, right? They were not helpful because they don't have that perspective, right? They went to school, they did the CS or the mechanical engineering or the electrical engineering degree, and then they went out, they got a job, and that's all she wrote. And so to them, it's like, oh, wait, you want to try to start coding? Well, you should probably go back to college. It's like, well, I'm not going to do that. So that's out of right. So I ended up doing a lot of searching on my own. Right. And even back then, gonna make me sound old, but even back then, like it just wasn't, this was only, what, 6 years ago? Yeah. 6.5 years ago. So even then, like you search things on the internet, you search things on Google, you try and find stuff. You get a lot of noise. You get a lot of things that are just going to try and take your money and not necessarily like provide you much. And it's really unfortunate. And that's the days of ads, right? But there are some really good free options. And so I started looking, just watching YouTube videos. I was trying to also find what I wanted to do, right? Like I was just playing around with things more than anything. Like I started on the Visual Basic stuff and I was like, oh, this is cool. What else can I do? And so I started just, trying to find new and cool things. I made a little game. I started messing around with Unity and C#. And then from there, I was like, I want to write an app, and I started working with WPF. And then I was just kind of like bouncing all over the place, right? And I had no clue what I was doing. I was just all over. And after a while, like I remember I didn't learn about Git until I did my boot camp. Like I had no clue what Git was. I had seen things about Git like on the internet and just through my searching and research, and like I was like, this looks incredibly confusing. I have no idea what this is. This doesn't make any sense to me. So I never really got into it. And then, I kind of realized after a while, I was like, I can do all these little things, right? I'm learning some stuff. I've been able to fumble my way around and be able to write some things that are fun and cool. But nothing big. I still didn't really understand it at the end of the day. And so I wanted to give myself some more legitimacy. And I had gotten into, I guess I should say too. So through 2018, I was doing this learning. And then towards the end of 2018, I had found React. And I loved, I had a lot of fun with it, right? Because it's very malleable. You can do a lot of cool things. So I had made some, like I said, I made some little games and stuff, just HTML web app games, just little things. Tic-tac-toe. Yep. I made like well, this used to be hosted. It's actually not hosted anymore. I need to take care of that. But why can't I think of it? Mastermind, the code breaker game. Okay, nice. It was a lot of fun. I used to play it. Like I made stuff that I wanted, right? So, and then after that, I got into React Native. Right. And I started working in React Native, and because I wanted to do mobile stuff. I was like, how can I do mobile things? And it was like, oh, well, iOS development. I had tried to do iOS development, and Swift was still, I think at that time, Swift was still not super mature, if I recall. Because
was it in 2018 or around 2018,
2019?
Yeah. So Swift, I think, came out like end of 2015. And then 2016, there was a lot of breaking changes with Swift going from like 2.1 or 1.1 to like 2.1. But yeah, so
And there wasn't a lot of examples online either. That was the tough part too. You try and learn things, and I mean, God, reading, and you know this, but like you go onto a website, or you go into like a language, like a website for a language, right? You read their documentation. You want to talk about dense? Oh my goodness, it takes a while just to even like be able to read some of those docs and understand what they're trying to say. Like, like the TypeScript documentation is, oh my goodness. That's one of the densest things I've ever had to read in my life.
Yep.
And so it was tough getting into that, because it was very much all on my own. And so I fumbled around with this stuff, and I was kind of like all over the place. I didn't really know where to focus or what to do. I was just kind of working on things that like I had popped in my head. And I did a boot camp in 2020. Pandemic hit, right? It's like, I'm at home. There's nothing to do. So I, was doing a lot of coding, and then I was like, I'm going to do a boot camp, give myself some legitimacy. Like I really enjoy doing this. I think I want to do this as like a career, right? Or transition my current career into the space.
Yeah.
Because I did like the company I worked for. So I did a boot camp, and that was great. I mean, I'm still close with the guy that taught me in the boot camp. We're still good friends.
Was it a group setting boot camp, or was it a one-on-one?
It was a group setting. Yeah. Okay. So it was an 11-week program. And yeah, it was super beneficial. It covered a lot of different areas. Version control was probably the most valuable thing for me, but I learned a lot of tips and tricks. I learned how to write clean code. I learned how to structure a code base. I learned how to structure a file system. I learned all the things that like the internet just doesn't teach you, right? Even like you go on YouTube and you search like, how do I make a mobile app? How do I do this in React? How do I do this in React Native? Whatever. How do I do this with Python? It's going to give you your answer, but it's going to be a very specific, tailored to that situation answer. And it's also going to give you a very small view of how you would use that kind of implementation, right? And that's, I think, the biggest challenge is, how do you learn to work within an enterprise project? And how do you structure your own projects to have a better understanding of how that works whenever you work with multiple people, right? So that was another thing that the boot camp did really well was, we had a lot of group projects, so we had to work with others, and we ran things like we did like 2-week sprints and all this stuff. And it was they tried to prepare us like, this is what it's like to do development work in the world. And that was really beneficial. So I think I picked a really good one. I think, like, talking to other people that have been to boot camps, I feel like mine was a very different experience. It was more tailored towards, how can we prepare you for the workforce, and not how can we just shove some code down your throat in 6 weeks and get our 20K, right? Like I think that's what a lot of them sometimes can do. So definitely, like, anyone that's listening to this or taking away from this, research your boot camp before you do it. Boot camps are wonderful things. But
what's the barrier to entry to a boot camp? Like, is it you mentioned 20K? You don't have to mention exactly how much you paid, but because I know price fluctuates.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest thing, right? Boot camps. And this is another thing too. I think not everyone has the opportunity, the means to be able to go to college or to go to a boot camp or even access to a computer. And there are some really good free options, and happy to get into those too, because I think they're worth talking about for sure. But as far as boot camps go, yeah, they do cost money. I paid like $15,000 for mine. I had to get a loan. which was fine for me in that situation. I was, at that point, I was 2 years into my corporate role. And, I had my other things before that too. So I was doing okay. But I got a loan just to do it. And that's just what worked for me at the time. There are a lot of really good state options, though. So I have a buddy that did boot camp, and the state of Ohio paid for all of it.
Okay.
So definitely look out. Do research within your state and see what your state has to offer about career change, upskilling, that kind of thing. Especially if you're unemployed, and you can get assistance. Yeah.
Okay.
Assistance to be able to do those kind of boot camps. So definitely worth looking into that if you don't have the means necessarily to do a boot camp. I do recommend it for sure. Just because it gives you a little bit, it's easier, right? Because you have someone who is well-versed in the industry, well-versed around the work that needs to be done. And you're going to get a lot more prepared to actually enter the workforce when you are self-taught.
Sure. And what's the level of expectation should that person expect? Like, is it going to be a lot of workload? Can somebody do a boot camp and hold a job at the same time? Is it beneficial to just focus on the boot camp? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that's going to depend on the person, honestly. Here's what I will say in terms of being self-taught. And this is the big difference between CS degrees and people that are self-taught. If you go to school and you do the CS degree, you're going to get that piece of paper and it's going to help you out immensely. You'll be able to get just about any job you want. That doesn't necessarily mean that you like the work. It doesn't even necessarily mean that you're good at it. And to be honest, college does not teach you modern development practices. It doesn't teach you modern languages. It doesn't teach you modern frameworks. It doesn't teach you a lot of what you use in the real world. Go figure.
Yeah. It's more about, theory.
It teaches you how to think, right?
Yeah.
And that's where it can be extremely helpful. It's always good if you can do it, right? If you have the means. Definitely not required. And in terms of being self-taught, right, or career transitioning, or I'm in college now, but I'm doing basket weaving, whatever. How do I transition into this? If you are going to be self-taught, you have to be highly motivated. There's no other way around it. You can't phone it in. If you don't love it and you're self-taught, the odds of you succeeding are pretty low. Just in my opinion, you have to be pretty self-motivated, I think. Like I said, you have to enjoy it. I don't know if you would agree, but I feel like everyone I've ever met that's self-taught that does this for a living loves it. They're like obsessed with learning new things and new technologies and writing code. Like,
Yep. I agree 100%. Just because, like, that's all I think about. Like, my brain never shuts down. All I think about is code. How do I improve? How do I do this? And then I would go out, just like, I don't know, like preparing my meal or watching a TV show, and I'm thinking about, oh, that's what it is. And I run to my computer and then try to fix whatever, issue I was having. So
have you ever gone to bed? You've been working all day on something, go to bed, and then just wake up at like 2 a.m, like, I got it.
Yep.
Oh man.
Yep, definitely.
That's a great thing, right? Like once you get to the point, I do feel like once you get to the point where you're working in this, you're writing code, like you do kind of pseudocode in your head, and you kind of start to like see that structure, and taking a break from something, regardless if it's, you know, coding industry or not, is a good thing, right? People get that mental block. So it is good to step away, and then it'll come to you. I've stepped away from things and come, like there have been things I've worked on for like, you know, 12 straight hours, just punching away. And then like, okay, I need to step away, come back. And it's like, what was I thinking? Oh my God. Why I made this way more complicated than it needed to be. So
I'd like to switch gears a little bit. So you did the self-taught thing, and then you wanted to be legit. So you went through a boot camp. Yeah. And then how did you actually break into tech, and you know, how did you acquire your first job? What was the experience like? Was it overwhelming? Did you feel like quitting? Did you feel like you made a bad decision? Like what was it like for you?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. All those things went through my mind during that process. Right. And, you know, there's no growth without some struggle, in my opinion. You know, this is gonna be really, really cheesy. I'm sorry for that, but one of my favorite quotes of all time: "To improve is to change. To perfect is to change often." And I have, that's resonated with me ever since I was young. Right, that's a quote from Winston Churchill, and I remember the first time I ever heard that. I think I was 16 years old, and that was something that was highly motivating for me. Like, yes, absolutely, to improve is to change. Right, you need to change. Change is the only constant. You need to change constantly, and you need to be okay with that and embrace it. Embrace the change. Embrace the failure. It's important, and I've failed a lot in my life. Right, and so in terms of you know, that transition and what that looked like for me. When I was originally going down this path, it started out as fun, right? I just had a lot of free time. And so I was just doing it because I thought it was cool. And then I was like, oh, wait, I actually really like doing this. I have fun with it. And so, you know, I ended up sitting in my computer and learning this stuff for, you know, sometimes like 16, 18 hours at a time. I would just like be locked in, focused, working on a project. And it didn't really become a thing as I want to transition my career, because truthfully, I had a good career, right? The job that I had, you know, I made fine money. There was no reason I needed to leave. And I didn't really have to do anything. So that's another little piece of that too. Right. So, I wanted to originally, whenever I was thinking about like, I want to do this for a living, I wanted to kind of parlay my new skill set with the company that I was already at. Right. So I wanted to take that, apply it to some things, try and get some recognition, and then move around into the corporate side of things, into the tech space. Unfortunately, in the corporate world, sometimes things can be based on who you know rather than merit or any of that. And sometimes it's also tenure, right? Well, this guy has been waiting for promotion for X amount of years, so we're going to move him to this tech role that he has no idea what he's doing, right? And that's actually what happened. I had applied for a tech role within the company I was at, and I didn't get it. You know, I had done the interview, all of that. I had recommendations from because I was in good standing with the president of our company, with two of my VPs, and my senior director, and I had recommendations from all of them for that role, but I still didn't get the role. And they put me on I'll never forget this. I got put on a tech testing kind of team. Basically, they were rolling out new tech, new hardware for our employees. And I got put on that team to like analyze it and to do a case study with it and all that stuff.
Okay.
And so I'm down there. And at this point, I'd been working with React Native for a little while, like a couple years. And so I'm down there and at our home office, right? And they had hired I can't remember. Oh, Cognizant. Yeah, they'd hired Cognizant to do the build of the application that employees were going to be using. Mm-hmm. And they had the developers in the room, right, when we were doing all of this stuff. And some of the developers, not all of them, but essentially it was kind of like a fact-finding mission for them as we were going through the application and seeing what worked, what didn't work. How could things be structured a little bit better? And so it was funny because, I was writing my own apps at the time too. So I was looking through this. I'm like, oh, hey, see how you're doing this? Like instead of that, and I was able to speak their language. And so I was able to be like, hey, do this, this, this. And they're like, oh yeah, no, that's cool. We can do that for sure. And I was like, are you guys using React Native for this? Because I'm getting a React Native vibe. And they're like, yeah, that's exactly what we use. I was like, oh, okay, well, this makes it way easier then. All you got to like change this or, do this, whatever. And I felt really disgruntled by that in a way. And here's why, because the role that I had applied for, which was, I can't remember the exact role, but it was in the technical space. So the guy that got that role was in the room with us, and he was someone that I had known from my time. He was from a different state though. But he was in that role, and I was talking to him. And I'm like, yeah, man, that's awesome. So do you, when did you start writing code? Like, you self-taught? Like, did you get a degree in this? And he's like, oh, I have no clue what I'm doing. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, I was up for promotion. They put me in this. He's like, I don't understand any of this. I'm only here. They put me here so I could like get some more experience around it and start to try and learn something around the role. I'm like, cool. So this is what this is going to be like. So that really motivated me to move on, right? Because I wanted to do that work. And I wasn't being given an opportunity. So that's when I started looking elsewhere. I was kind of, methodical with my searching. Like I said, my job was fine. I had time. It wasn't a restriction or anything. So I was able to look around and be strategic about where I wanted to land. Okay. As far as like, how much work it took to get to that point too. I mean, like I said, I had put in like a ton of time and a ton of effort through like up until that. But once I started on like, I want to get a job doing this, which was probably around like, I think that was 2021. It was early. Yeah, it was like January 2021. That I had gone down there and that situation had happened. And that's when I got really motivated to do something different. And so I was like, I'm going to get really good at this. I'm going to learn. I'm going to get better. And I had done my boot camp and everything. And so I started just like a madman, just writing code and doing projects and working on anything and everything and doing Udemy courses, which I do want to mention Udemy too here in a second, but, all kinds of things. And it took me a while because I was like, what do I actually want to do? Right? Like I can't learn everything, and I'm trying to learn Python. I'm trying to learn TypeScript. I'm trying to learn C#. I'm trying to learn Swift, Objective-C, right? I was doing too much in too many different areas and spreading myself very thin. And, our brains, especially once you get older, I'm in my 30s at this point, our brains can only have so much intake. And so I wanted to, I took a step back and I wanted to make sure I was doing this in a way that made sense. And so I just thought about like, what motivates me? Like, what do I want to work on? What sounds cool? And the mobile development thing is what really came to me and really spoke to me. So, I had done React Native stuff for a little while and I really liked it. So I focused straight up on that. The way that I viewed it before that was like, I'm going to learn things that I can get a job in, right? Like I had mentioned, I have friends in the software engineering space, and one of my friends wanted to get me on with his company, but I needed to know C#. And so that's when I started doing a lot of .NET and WPF stuff and writing C#. Unity helped with that too, and writing those scripts. But I didn't really enjoy it. It wasn't as satisfying as the mobile development. And so, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do the C# thing. And I really started focusing on that. I knew eventually though, it's like, okay, well, if I want to do this for real, like, and I focus on one thing, eventually I'm going to get good enough at that one thing to land a job. Like at some point in the timeline, I'm going to know enough to where it'll work out. Yep. And that's kind of what I always banked on, right? Like, be prepared to fail, be prepared to be turned down. And I was fully prepared for that going into it. So, I worked on apps and projects. I mean, at minimum, I always worked at a minimum like 4 or 6 hours.
Okay.
Always, every day.
Okay.
And when I say work, some of that was probably pretty light. There was probably days of like research or whatever, but I was every day. I was at my computer doing something around it. Even if I'm just messing around with an app, like sandboxing something while I'm on Discord talking to some buddies, right? And then there were a lot of days there were days where I spent 12, 18 hours just at my computer, just plugging away, learning, writing.
Yeah, repetition reinforces learning. So
yeah, exactly. And especially with this, right? Like you have the syntax for these languages. Once you write the same thing over and over and over and over and over, you just eventually know what you need to write.
Yeah.
And that's hugely important. And especially as a self-taught person, you need to have, the ability to perform in a coding exercise if they provide one in a technical interview. You need to have projects that are well structured and are easy to read, especially if you're going to present those to someone for them to judge your value, right? It's very important. So practice is the biggest thing. If you can practice that skill, practice that syntax, just constantly write, whatever you can. That's why I always hated boilerplate stuff whenever I was learning. I think there's a big push in certain when it comes to some of these learning tools that exist, you'll see hey, download this boilerplate code or download this sample project. And that to me is just all you're doing is kneecapping the people you're trying to help, in my opinion. Yeah. You're not helping anyone. You have to write it. And this goes back to I was doing Udemy. I was doing a lot of Udemy. I didn't resonate with YouTube. I didn't really like YouTube, if I'm honest, just because everything that YouTubers do is so very specific to that one use case. Okay. And they also will bring in these weird third-party libraries. And then it's okay, well, how do I do this without using that? Right? And they don't, I don't think they do a good job a lot of times. And it's because it's there for these quick hits.
Yep.
It's monetization. I understand it, but Udemy was very good. I really enjoyed what Udemy had to offer. And if I have any advice to anyone that uses a Udemy course, as you work through it, get to the initial setup if it's something that you need help with, right? If it's just kind of the initial like starting point. But whenever you get to a section, like I did a lot of Angela Yu courses and she's great.
Yeah.
As you get to a point where she's going to say, Angela would say like, okay, now we're going to build like this search functionality in. Pause it. Build it yourself. Do everything. You spend as much time as you need to try to implement what that instructor is talking about on your own. And then go back once you've done that and play it and see where your solution was to their solution. And that's going to enlighten you because you've just done you've done the manual work, right? So now it's in your head. You're not just copying someone, because if it's just rote copying, you're not gaining anything out of that. You're not understanding it. And that's the thing with being self-taught. And this is why I keep coming back to the failure, right? Like being self-taught is a mountain of failure.
Yep.
And that is what's going to make you improve. If you are not prepared to fail and write bad code and have people trash your code, or the amount of people that have made me feel terrible on Stack Overflow is insane.
Yeah.
when I was early on with this. So be prepared for that. And it's a good thing. You need to have a thick skin, right? But it strengthens you and it makes you better. I really think that's important.
Nice. Could you share a story about a mentor or a connection that played a pivotal role or a key role in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of talked about, the first one, right?
Yep.
But when I got my first dev job, I eventually did get a job as a developer, 2022. And I had applied to a lot of places, and it just never worked out. A lot of places wouldn't even call me back, or get back to me. Some of them were very instant rejections. I just couldn't get anyone to really give me an opportunity. Out of 400 different applications I put in, I had maybe 5 interviews over that entire time. And what's funny is with NetJets, they reached out to me, which was very strange. I had a recruiter that I'd kind of befriended and, that I had reached out to early on. And she was like, hey, I'm going to find you something. Like I feel like you'd be good. Like I'll find you something. And one day she gives me a call, and this has been like months that I had this relationship with her. She gives me a call and she's like, hey, my colleague has an opportunity with this company called NetJets. Would you be interested in talking to them? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And I'd never heard of NetJets before, right? So the recruiter gives me a call, and she's telling me about the role and whatnot. It's a mobile development role using React Native. I'm like, sweet, that's exactly what I want. This would be perfect. And it was even funny because she was telling me, private aviation. I was like, oh, so it's a little regional airline. That's cute.
Yeah.
I had no idea, right? What kind of just stature that company has in the world. But I did my interview, and one of the people I interviewed with was someone who became a mentor to me. And I don't know if it was ever in kind of like an official capacity as a mentor, but I looked up to him as a mentor. And Henry, I've even told you, I can, and it's funny because I think you're younger than me too. So it's like, but I do consider you a mentor to me in a way.
Appreciate it.
I reach out to you when I have things, or like I'd like your advice, or I appreciate so much of what you've provided to me as far as like experience, and kind of that leadership understanding too, because you've been in my space since I started with them, and just everything about what you've been able to accomplish and just your intelligence is just so inspiring and hugely motivating for me. I've learned a lot from you too. So
thank you.
I've enjoyed all the time I've got to work with you. So, and I know we don't get to work together that often, but when we do, I cherish it for sure. And so I've had quite a few people like that at NetJets, but getting to land where I did was huge for me, because I know other people that have entered the workforce from being self-taught, and the team that they were on was either, spread out, they were remote, or, people don't really like interact with them. And they don't really have that support system. I feel like I got to learn from one of the best people that I could have ever learned from. And, I'm not going to say his name just because I don't know how comfortable he would be just me mentioning in public. But
I know. I think I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, genius, absolute genius of a human being. Yeah. And I had my interview with him. I had my interview with the VP the next day. And whenever I actually got to NetJets, I got there. It was my first day there, and they were just getting my device provisioned, and he was kind of showing me around and stuff. Second day there, I get my Mac, right? And he comes up to me and goes, "Okay, here's the link to this setup script. Go ahead and run it. If it breaks, fix it."
Yeah.
Good luck. I was like, oh man, okay. I've never worked with Bash in my life. Like I didn't know it, right? I had done command line stuff before, which I had done some Bash, but I didn't think like I needed to really learn that. So I was like, and this script is huge. I mean, we're talking like 5,000 lines of Bash code, which is, if you've ever written Bash before, listeners out there, you know what I'm talking about. So, yeah, it's dense. And I love Bash now. Like I love writing scripts. I've written way too many. I'm sure you're aware.
Yep.
So, it was great because I got thrown right in, right? And it's like sink or swim, man. And that's what I did. He was hugely motivating for me because he definitely shared this idea, like getting into that industry, getting into that company. And, I had always had this kind of mantra of like, learn, always be learning, always be doing something. And he shared that exact same thing. And it was really crazy to see someone just so different than the status quo of software engineering. You have, I think, a lot of people that are perfectly fine to just kind of let things stay the way they are. And I was hugely inspired by the fact that this guy was just so like, we need to improve. He was always learning something new, always learning about new technologies. Was so up to date on things. And it's like, that's the bar right there. That's the bar of what I want to be. And that relationship and his mentorship to me, that's the only reason that I was able to do what I was able to do with my career path now, and also become the developer I am today. I mean, I worked really, really hard and put in a lot of hours to get to where I am. And not everyone, like I said, not everyone has that time. I don't have kids, things like that. Like, I get it. Everyone's situation is different too. So, but I wanted to be like him. I didn't want to disappoint either. Right. Like, I'm going to use every opportunity I can to work with this man. And like, he was, if you recall too, he always went into the office, always. He would, work from home days, he was there. Me too. I didn't work from home. I went in every single day so I could, be right there behind him in that row so that I could turn around and I could ask him questions. I could siphon off that knowledge. I could go to lunch with him and I could pick his brain. He could tell me things that helped me become better.
Yeah.
And that's so important. I think for anyone that is in a situation where you crave mentorship or you want mentorship, make it happen. I feel like in some ways I've forced you into into mentoring me. I don't leave you alone. And same thing with other coworkers. And I know you know who. And I want to know, like, how am I doing? How can I improve? What can I do better? And can you take a look at this? Like writing up a POC and sending it out. Like, hey, can you look at this? Can you please give me some feedback? I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. That stuff is so important to me. And just being able to really have that is great. So another recommendation I would have for anyone that is trying to enter the workforce or get their first dev job, whatever, do not go for a remote role. Remote roles are, sexy. They're cool. But you're doing yourself a disservice with a remote role. In my opinion, I think that you lose a lot of, you lose a ton of potential gains by doing remote. So if you can get a hybrid role, get into an office, get to work with people and be able to get to know them and ask them these questions and establish that relationship, is going to be huge for your career. And it was for mine. I worked really, really hard because I wanted to make sure that I was up to his standard, right? This man was a genius and had such a standard. Principal programmer. That's what I want to be, right? And I'm not going to be that unless I am as good as the person I'm trying to learn from, and I need to siphon all the knowledge I can with the time I'm given. So
I agree.
I got that job, and then eventually got transitioned into I got my senior after a year, and I attribute that 100% to that man. So the mentorship thing is huge. I know that was probably a little long-winded for your question, but
no worries.
I wanted to really paint the picture there because I really do think that remote work is very harmful to mentorship to the mentorship thing. It really hurts it,
especially if you are new, if you're breaking into tech for the first time. But if you're a senior or lead, and remote work is fine, but you need that face-to-face interaction. You need mentorship. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And just to clarify, for sure. I only mean for people that are starting out, getting into their first role, or even if it's not your first role, but you still are not, you might be an associate, a junior, even mid-level. Getting into an office and being around those people, it's important.
Yep. So I think we're running a little long. I think we also covered every question I wanted to cover. So
sorry, man.
Where can our no worries. How can the listeners reach out to you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Ian McKain. If you search me, I should pop up. There's not really too many McKain's out there, and there's even less Ian McKain's out there. There's only one, and he's in Great Britain, and he won't talk to me. So I added him on Facebook whenever I was in my 20s, and he denied me. But other than that, you can also find me on GitHub. McKain is my GitHub handle. My GitHub is a little outdated. I'm not going to lie. I'm not as up to date there. But I do have some good projects that, feel free to look at. A couple of those projects were part of the reason I got into the role that I got into, right? I think if you're self-taught, having projects is really, really important. And I don't think I got to mention this, but if you do have your projects, make sure that you have very clean, readable code. Just as a quick thing, and I know we're wrapping up, but I recall in my interview, the guy that actually was my mentor, right? He had asked me a question about promise statements. He was like, "Can you explain to me what a promise statement is?" And I couldn't. I looked at them all and I'm like, "Hey, I can't tell you what exactly a promise statement is because I just didn't have that kind of like textbook knowledge at the time, right? But I know how to use them and I know when to use them. And that's when I referenced a piece of because, preparing for an interview, what I did was I had my repos. I went through all of my code repos that were available on my GitHub. And anything that I felt like was worth highlighting to show my skills, I made notes of that and then had that for just quick access to be able to reference. So I said, hey, go to this file, go to this repo, go to this file, line, whatever. And you'll see I'm using a promise statement. I'm implementing it appropriately to perform this function and this task. And, this is why I needed it. I needed to wait on the response and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And that was really beneficial. And I remember he even talked to me afterward and he was like, hey, you weren't able to answer the question, but I looked at your code and you were honest. Like you told me, I don't know how to answer that. I can't answer that, but I can show you what I've done with them and here's how to use them. And I care more about that than I care about you being able to answer the definition of a word. And I'm I really appreciate that. So anyone that is listening that's the one reason I want to say that was because I think it's really important to understand your code. Don't just take from ChatGPT. Don't just take someone's example. Write the code yourself. Understand it. Understand how it works. Understand why you need it. And if you can do that and you can explain the why and the how, that is so much more important than some arbitrary definition, in my opinion.
I agree. All right. Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. I appreciate the opportunity. It was fun, man. I enjoyed it.